Your adult child blames you for their anxiety, for their failed relationships, for the way they handle conflict, for the choices they've made, for the life they're living now. Maybe they say it directly. Maybe it comes through in the way they talk to you. A low-level resentment that colors every conversation, every visit, every phone call. And you're left holding a question that doesn't have an easy answer. Is this fair? Is any of it true? And what are you supposed to do with it? Today, we're going to work through all of it, honestly, and from more than one direction. We're going to look at the psychology behind why this happens, including the role that social media and therapy culture play in shaping it. We're going to make a real distinction between blame that isn't fair and blame that deserves a closer look. And we're going to ask some hard questions, the kind that most videos on this topic skip entirely. Then we'll end with 5 specific things you can actually do. Part 1. Why this happens. Let's start with something that might be uncomfortable to hear, but that actually contains some relief. When an adult child blames a parent, it is almost always the path of least resistance. Parents are what psychologists call a safe target. You are the person your child knows will not abandon them, no matter what they say. You are the person whose love has been unconditional for so long that it has become assumed. And that safety, that reliable, unearned safety, makes you the easiest place to put pain that doesn't have a clear address. This doesn't mean the blame is invented. It means that when someone is carrying hurt they don't fully understand, they aim it at the person they trust most, not to leave. In a strange way, being blamed by your adult child is sometimes evidence of how safe they have always felt with you. But there is another layer here, and it comes from psychology. It's called external locus of control. Locus of control refers to where a person locates the source of what happens to them in their life. Someone with an internal locus of control tends to believe that their own choices, actions, and responses shape their life in significant ways. Someone with an external locus of control tends to believe that outside forces, other people, circumstances, luck, fate, are responsible for where they are. Research consistently shows that people with a strong external locus of control have more difficulty with accountability. When something goes wrong, the instinct isn't to ask what I could have done differently. It's to find who is responsible. And in a family system, that usually means parents. Here is the important thing. This is not always a character flaw. External locus of control is often something that gets built in childhood through specific experiences, and 2 very different kinds of experiences can produce it. The first is the child who was blamed too much. The child who heard constantly that they were wrong, lazy, difficult, too sensitive, never quite good enough. When a child grows up being told that everything is their fault, something counterintuitive can happen. They eventually stop being able to tolerate any fault at all. The shame becomes so unbearable that the only way to survive it is to push it outward. Blame becomes a shield, protecting a fragile sense of self-worth that was damaged long before adulthood. The second is the child who was protected too much. The child whose parents solved every problem, smoothed every difficulty, stepped in before any consequence could land. These children grew up learning, not from neglect but from love, that problems are always someone else's responsibility to fix. When life becomes hard as an adult, and it always does, they have no internal experience of navigating difficulty themselves, so they look outward, and the person they look toward first is the person who was always responsible for fixing things. You. 2 very different childhoods, the same result. There is a third layer that cannot be ignored, and it is cultural. In the last 15 years, the language of psychology has entered everyday life in a way it never had before. Words like toxic, trauma, gaslighting, narcissist, and boundaries became part of how an entire generation describes family relationships. Social media made this language available at scale. Entire communities formed around shared experiences of parental harm, and the stories that spread the fastest were the most extreme ones, the clearest cases of abuse, neglect, and cruelty. The problem is that this framework, applied wholesale to every family difficulty, leaves very little room for complexity. It tends to produce a binary: either your parents were supportive and healthy, or they were toxic, and you need to protect yourself from them. The ordinary, imperfect middle, where most actual families live, doesn't generate engagement, so it disappears from view. This doesn't mean the framework is wrong. Genuine harm happens in families every day. But it does mean that a parent who made mistakes, who had their own struggles, who sometimes got it wrong, can end up being described in the same language as someone who was truly abusive. And the adult child who has spent years in online communities that validate the most extreme interpretations of family pain may genuinely not know the difference. Part 2. The honest question. Is any of it true? This is where most videos on this topic stop being useful. They either tell parents that their children are ungrateful and they should stop listening, or they tell parents to accept all blame without question. Neither is honest, and neither helps. The honest position is this: some of what your adult child is blaming you for is probably not fair, and some of it probably deserves a real look. Here is how to tell the difference. Blame that is likely unfair tends to have certain qualities. It is total, you are blamed for everything, across every area of their life, with no acknowledgement of any contributing factors. It is immovable. No response you give, no apology you make, no change you demonstrate ever reduces it. It arrives as a label. You are a narcissist. You are toxic. You are the reason, rather than as a specific account of specific events. And it tends to emerge or intensify after a period of immersion in certain online communities or a particular therapeutic relationship. None of this means your child is lying. It means they are working from a framework that may not fit your actual history together. Their pain is real. The interpretation may not be. Blame that deserves a closer look has different qualities. It is specific. They remember particular moments, particular things you said, particular patterns that repeated over years. It connects to things you recognize, even if it doesn't match your memory exactly. It produces in you, when you're honest, something other than pure indignation, a flicker of recognition, a discomfort that has more to do with what's true than with what's fair. Here is the hardest question on this part of the list. When your child tells you something hurt them, what is your first response? If your first response is to explain why it didn't happen the way they remember, or why you had reasons, or why other things they don't know about made it impossible for you to do better, that response tells you something. It tells you that you have not yet let their experience land, not their interpretation of what happened, their experience of it. Two people can experience the same event entirely differently. A parent who was overwhelmed and doing their best experienced one thing. A child who needed something and didn't receive it experienced another. Both things can be true, and the parent's good intentions do not erase the child's experience of the outcome. Part 3. The harder look. This section is for parents who are willing to go further. Not because you are certain the blame is fair. You may be quite certain it isn't. But because the honest question is not only whether your child is being fair, it is also whether there is anything in the pattern they're describing that you recognize. These are the questions worth sitting with. Did your child grow up hearing that their feelings were wrong? Not that they were bad, necessarily, just that they were too sensitive, overreacting, making a big deal of things. If a child is told often enough that their internal experience is incorrect, they stop trusting it. And when that child is in pain as an adult, They don't have access to their own feelings with any clarity. They only have the behavior those unprocessed feelings produce. Blame is often what unprocessed pain looks like from the outside. Did your child grow up watching you blame others? This is perhaps the most difficult question on this list. Locus of control is learned, and it is learned first by watching. If the household you raised your child in was one where difficulty was consistently explained through other people's failings, where your spouse was wrong, where the neighbors were difficult, where nothing that went wrong was ever yours to own, your child absorbed that template. They are not doing something different from what they learned. They are doing exactly what they learned. Did your child ever receive an apology from you that felt real? Not an explanation of why you did what you did, not an account of how hard things were, a simple, clean acknowledgement. I got that wrong. I'm sorry. Many parents over 60 were raised in households where that kind of accountability was not modeled. Apology felt like weakness. Admitting fault felt like surrender. And so they raised children who never saw what it looked like for an adult to own something cleanly, without qualification, and move forward. Those children are now adults who don't trust apologies easily, because they have rarely, if ever, received one that didn't come with a defense attached. None of this makes you a bad parent. All of it is worth knowing. Part 4. 5 things you can actually do. Step 1. Stop trying to resolve it in a single conversation. The instinct, when someone blames you for something, is to address it immediately, to explain, to correct the record, to reach resolution before the conversation ends. That instinct almost never works with this kind of blame. Blame that has been building for years does not dissolve in one conversation, and attempting to resolve it quickly usually results in the parent defending themselves and the adult child feeling, once again, that they haven't been heard, which deepens the blame rather than reducing it. What works instead is a long game. It is the accumulation of small moments where you respond differently than you have before, where you listen without immediately explaining, where you ask a question instead of providing an answer, where you let something land before you respond to it. This is not about accepting blame that isn't fair. It is about creating the conditions under which a real conversation can eventually happen. That takes time. It cannot be forced. Step 2. Find what is true before you address what isn't. In almost every instance of adult-child blame, there is something true somewhere in it, even when the full picture is unfair. Your job is to find that something before you say anything else. Not because finding it means accepting all the rest, but because when you lead with what is true, when you say, I hear that this hurt you, and I can see how that could have happened, before you address the parts that feel unfair, you change the entire dynamic of the conversation. Most adult children who blame their parents are not, at their core, trying to destroy the relationship. They are trying to be heard. When you demonstrate that you can hear them, genuinely, without immediately defending yourself, the intensity of the blame often reduces on its own. Not because the pain disappears, because the pain no longer has to fight so hard to be acknowledged. Step 3. Give a real apology for what you actually did. Not a comprehensive apology for everything they have ever felt, not an apology designed to end the conversation. A specific, honest acknowledgement of something real. This is harder than it sounds. Many parents, when they attempt an apology, say things like, I'm sorry you felt that way, or I'm sorry, but you have to understand what I was dealing with at the time. These are not apologies. They are deflections in apologies' clothing, and your adult child recognizes them immediately. A real apology sounds like this. I got that wrong. I can see now that what I did, or didn't do, hurt you. I wish I had done it differently. Full stop. No but. No however. No context. If there is context that genuinely matters, it can come later, after the apology has had a chance to land, not attached to it like a condition. Step 4. Look at your own patterns honestly. If the research we discussed earlier resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in the parent who blamed too much or the parent who solved too much, this step is about deciding what to do with that recognition. You cannot go back and re-raise your child. You cannot undo the template that was set, but you can change what the template looks like going forward. You can become, in your adult relationship with your child, a person who owns things, who apologizes without qualification, who asks about their experience rather than correcting their account of it, who models, even now, what it looks like to take responsibility without falling apart. That modeling is not nothing. Adults continue to learn from their parents long after childhood is over. The parent who changes how they show up in their 70s is teaching their child something. It may not fix everything. It will not be invisible. Step 5. Know what you will not accept. This is the step that most videos on this topic leave out because it requires acknowledging something uncomfortable. There is a version of this that goes too far. Accountability is healthy. Reflection is necessary. Genuine apology is important. But there is a difference between a child who is asking you to see them and a child who is using blame as a permanent weapon. There is a difference between an ongoing conversation about a difficult history and a relationship in which you are required to accept total responsibility for everything that has ever gone wrong as the price of staying in contact. You are allowed to say, calmly and without hostility, I am willing to look honestly at what happened between us. I am not willing to accept that I am the cause of everything difficult in your life. Not as an ultimatum, not as a defense, as a statement of what a real relationship requires. Two people who can both be responsible for something. If your adult child is in a place where that statement is not possible, where any limit you express becomes further evidence of your toxicity, then the conversation cannot happen yet, and you cannot force it to. What you can do is remain available, remain steady, remain someone they could come back to when they are ready for something more than a verdict. Blame is painful to receive. It is especially painful when it comes from the person you have loved longest and worked hardest for. And it is especially confusing when you look honestly at your own history and genuinely cannot find the thing they are describing. But if today's conversation has offered anything, I hope it is this. The presence of blame does not tell you the whole story. It tells you that your child is in pain. It tells you that you are the safest place for that pain to land. And it tells you that something in the space between you still needs to be worked through, together, honestly, and with more patience than any single conversation can hold. You don't have to accept blame that isn't true. You don't have to collapse under the weight of a label that doesn't fit. But you do have the opportunity, if you choose to take it, to be the person who looks honestly at their own part, owns what they find, and keeps the door open. That is not a small thing to offer. For many families, it is the thing that changes everything. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Of the two patterns we talked about today, the parent who blamed too much and the parent who protected too much, do you recognize either one in how you raised your child? You don't have to answer publicly, but if something landed for you today, leave it in the comments, not to confess, not to be judged, but because the parents in this community who are willing to look honestly at themselves are exactly the ones who tend to find their way back. This has been Family Bonds After 60. Take care of yourself, and remember, the most important work is never finished. It just changes shape.